Hello and welcome to this special English edition of Magnus in honor of the World Press Freedom Day.
We are broadcasting now from Milan, studios of G School of Catholic University.
Press freedom is in danger everywhere, according to the annual index by Reporters Without Borders. The index assesses the state of journalism in 180 countries, and the 2023 edition of the index highlights the disastrous effects of news and information chaos in a globalized online information space that spreads fake news and propaganda. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia in February 2022 reflects this process, as the physical conflict was preceded by a heavy propaganda war. And media polarization is feeding and reinforcing internal social divisions, also in democratic societies such as the United States, France, and Italy too. The suppression of independent media is contributing to sharpen the polarization also in liberal democracies such as Poland, where the authorities have consolidated their control over public broadcasting.
Yes, and journalists still die in the front line. The last one was Bogdan Bitik, a Ukrainian reporter who has been killed by the Russian in the outskirts of Kherson 1 week ago. He was working together with Corrado Zunino, an Italian reporter for the Repubblica daily newspaper in Italy. So journalists are harassed and persecuted as well because of their investigation made with accuracy and by commitment about public and political figures. So that's why we decided to call them guardians of press freedom.
The Salvadoran Carlos Dara is one of them, and our correspondent Ludovica Rossi met him for us at the International Journalist Festival in Perugia, which is a small and beautiful town in the center of Italy. Carlos Dara was nominated World Press Freedom Hero in 2022 for his investigations in one of the most violent prisons in El Salvador. So, Ludovica, what are his investigations about, and why does Carlos Dara risk his life?
Carlos Dara is a pioneer of investigative reporting and online journalism in El Salvador and Latin America. In 1998, in the aftermath of the country's long civil war, he founded Hellfire, the first digital-only news outlet in Latin America. Since that, he defended the freedom of expression and the concept of independence in media. Over the decades, Hellfire has become a model of investigative journalism in Central America, with its fearless coverage of violence, corruption, inequality, and human rights violations. This is why Dara was named one of the 2022 World Press Freedom Hero.
More than deserved, I would say. Ludovica, why does journalism still matter in countries like El Salvador?
Despite Dada was a victim of various attacks by government, he recognized the high quality of Salvadorian journalism, which today is at its best. Dada said he strongly believes in the power of words, which remain our strongest medium in order to tell the truth and defend it from its enemies and censors. At the end, Dada received appreciation and empathy from the Perugia's festival crowd, moved by his words.
Thanks, Ludovica, for being with us today. We interview Carlos Dara firsthand and hear what he had to say.
I think that a free society needs information in order to make better decisions. So they need to be better informed. In most of countries' constitutions, there is no right to freedom of the press. There is a right for the citizens to be informed. When constitutions were made, the constitutionalists thought that press was very important for citizens to make better decisions. In these extraordinary times, we need to adapt and be very dynamic. We still have agency. We have a very powerful tool, which is our words, and our words trying to portray the truth through an editorial method of verification. That's what we do. So we have a very powerful tool. In order to use it, we have to ensure that it is safe from the reach of the people that want to silence us. So moving to Costa Rica confirms that we are going through dangerous and extraordinary times, but it also confirms that we are not paralyzed, which is the part of this movement that I like.
So China is one of the world's most autocratic and repressive regimes, and it uses political and legal arsenal to confine the population and cut it from the rest of the world. Jimmy Lai is the local champion of press freedom, and our correspondent Matteo Gallia is now in Perugia, where a lot of attention is raised about the censorship of Beijing. So, Matteo, help us. Who is Jimmy Lai? Who are we talking about?
Yes, Jimmy Lai is a 75 years old man. He is the founder of Apple Daily, which was the most popular tabloid in Hong Kong until its forced closure in 2021. Why was it closed? Because it was the only newspaper in Chinese language which was not controlled by the state, and also the last one openly against corruption and human rights abuses made by the Chinese government. This book was widely described as an attack to press freedom, and it was strongly condemned by experts from the United Nations. Mr. Lai, who is still considered to be an advocate for democracy, has been in prison since 2020 and now faces trial for alleged sedition and offenses for his journalism. The trial is due to begin in September and may lead to lifelong imprisonment.
So Matteo, Jimmy Lai's son goal, I think it's clear, he's fighting to free his father. But what should be done from the rest of us to free him?
Yes, the panel just ended with a full room of people holding up this sign as a message of support. When Hong Kong became a special region under China, a promise was made that democracy would have been preserved. But the day that Jimmy Lai was in prison, that was the bleakest day in the history of Hong Kong's democracy. The most important presence today was, of course, Sebastian Lai, who is Jimmy's son. He told us his father's story. He told us his fear that he might not see him ever again, and the fact that he still finds it hard to talk about the threats that he and his family received during these years. This panel is even more relevant in a context like this, an international journalism festival with people from all over the world. And a question has to be asked, of course, what can we do? And the answer is spread Jimmy's story, shout it out from our rooftops, because what happened to him can happen to everyone, especially in countries when you can be imprisoned just for printing the truth.
Thank you, Matteo. For sure, we will continue to advocate for his freedom.
Moving on, in October 2017, the Harvey Weinstein scandal changed the history of Hollywood. Women exposed the abuses of this powerful film producer, starting the so-called Me Too movement. Ronan Farrow was one of the journalists who investigated this case, and he published his work on the New Yorker magazine. Thanks to that, he won a Pulitzer Prize, and he is now working on a documentary about Weinstein's life. Selena Frasson met him in Perugia for us. Selena, could you tell us more about it?
Yes. After 6 years, the investigation of the New Yorker about Weinstein's circle of abuses and power in Hollywood has become an episode of the documentary Endangered, as well as other 3 investigations in which the reporters were submitted to threats, obstructions, and dangers. Here at the International Journalism Festival, the goal of protecting journalists and revealing the abuses of politicians or people of power against journalists is one of the main pillars of debates and discussions.
As journalists, we can't let the truth down. We are moderators of fact.
Government's attacking journalists is not new.
Oh, look at all the fake news.
This is happening widespread also.
The documentary Endangered is about to be presented by the Thomson Reuters Foundation CEO and by the production company. The Pulitzer Prize winner Ronan Farrow is one of the main speakers.
So it's clear that working as an investigative journalist is quite controversial and very dangerous, especially when it comes to face corruption in governments. The documentary Endangered explores other experiences of journalists, such as the Brazilian Patricia Campos Melo. Selena, which kind of threats does she face?
Another main character of the documentary is Patricia Campos Melo, an investigative reporter who revealed the manipulation of public opinion during the 2018 Brazilian electoral campaign. She told the audience how she was attacked by President Bolsonaro and targeted by haters on social platforms, and how she managed to persist in criticizing power. After several years of threats and exposure, she won the legal dispute between her and the President Bolsonaro, and this brought tears in her eyes and empathy among the audience.
Thank you, Selena, for being with us today.
So in the Press Freedom Day, we wish also to pay tribute to those among journalists who risk their lives every single day to witness the making of the history. That's what the AP journalists Vasilisa Stepanenko, Mstislav Chernov and Evgeny Maloletka did with covering Mariupol, a 20-minute documentary about the war in Ukraine. So the documentary is ready to be released by the Associated Press, and our correspondent Filippo Carpani is now in Perugia. So Filippo, how significant the siege of Mariupol was in the context of the war, and what about the AP coverage?
Yes, we are here outside of the auditorium to listen to the panel about the siege of Mariupol. Mariupol was the first siege in the Ukraine war. Heavy fighting and shelling shook the city and its infrastructures. And the first building that was targeted was the theater where people found refuge, but it was nonetheless. And the death toll of that attack is 600 people, making it the bloodiest war crime committed by the Russian armed forces. Vasilisa Stepanenko and Mstislav Chernov with Evgeny Maloletka were the only international reporters from the Associated Press in the city during the siege, and they are here now in Perugia to tell us about their experience and their work there as reporters.
So the documentary just shows some graphic images. Could you please tell us more about them?
Yes, so we've seen some preview clips of the movie that is coming out this summer, and they were really gritty images, really powerful ones. The audience was really shocked to see the images of the war, the horror firsthand, because of course they were all live footages from Mariupol taken by Mstislav. We've seen images of the bombing of the hospital, of the pregnant women or the women with their children being taken out, and also moments where the reporters were actually in direct danger with tanks shooting at the buildings around them. The public was really touched by the viewing of this footage, and of course we think that when all the movie will be released, everyone in the world will see how much of a tragedy the war is, and how in Mariupol the people have suffered for the invasion.
Thank you, Filippo, and our correspondent just met Cherno at the end of the panel. Here's what he said about the war and the information in Ukraine.
I think the decision to stay in Mariupol in a siege was made just even before the siege started. We knew that tactically and strategically Mariupol might be quite quickly surrounded by Russian forces. Therefore, a decision to go and decision to embrace this siege and become part of it was made before we even left to Mariupol. And then we just acted accordingly to we just try to survive and to report as long as possible. And then when we couldn't report anymore, when we were out of means to report, we tried to leave. You don't really see the impact of your work immediately, and you never actually know if your work impacts anyone at all, but you still hope and you still know that you have to keep reporting. And as Mariupol siege went on, as we got so many people just coming to us and saying, please just keep doing it, how could we stop, really?
So, according to our correspondent Filippo and Lorenzo, we as European media stay focused on the war when Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. We started looking for local sources when the conflict started, and the Kyiv Independent, a startup with tiny budget, stood out as the best in this environment. Within days, the Kyiv Independent became the voice of Ukraine in the world. Bianca Terzoni met the founders for us in Perugia. So, Bianca, how does the Kyiv Independent keep changing over the years?
Today we're standing here at the venue outside the Kyiv Independent panel, who has quite an interesting story. It was founded in 2021 by a consortium of 30 young journalists, and initially they had chosen Twitter as their main channel to inform users in real time about what was happening in the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, they had constantly to fight Russian propaganda in order to tell the atrocities committed by Moscow's government against the Ukrainian population. Now the Kyiv Independent has moved from being a 3-month-old startup to one of the most leading sources of information about what is happening in Ukraine. Its main goal is serve the public, claiming to be one of the best, trustworthy and independent voices in the war in Ukraine.
And Bianca, what about the independency of the journalist?
Yes, the Kyiv Independent is able to guarantee its independence because of mainly the team of the Kyiv Independent. There are young people who are still a startup, so they're able to move fast and change things really quickly. They're able to work non-stop, even when facing challenges every day. For example, sometimes they lose power and they cannot have an internet connection. So it is really important for them to be able to work together and to tell what is happening in Ukraine, because that for them is the most important thing right now.
Thanks, Bianca, for being with us today.
So let's move on from the battlefield to the region in peace. Indeed, there are some journalists who are fighting every single day to tell the truth, even if they are in exile. So our correspondent Maria Colonnelli is now in Perugia. He's actually know how media in exile are working, what are the challenges they have to face every single day. So Maria, good morning.
Recent international developments, such as the war in Ukraine, have highlighted the struggle of exiled media. However, the current technological situation makes them more efficient than ever before in terms of reaching their audiences. Despite the exiled media are widespread all over the world, the landscape remains still fragmented because of lack of knowledge of one another, language barriers, and the hassle of having to relocate and start operating in new countries and legal frameworks.
So Maria, any questions by the audience for them?
The audience reunited at Hotel Profani participated and listened actively, interacting with all the speakers. The questions asked by the audience were mainly focused on the functioning of exile media. What are the challenges faced by exile media outlets? How do digital platforms have an impact on their functioning? And can the experience of an exile media outlet from Nicaragua be relevant to one from Russia and vice versa? NEMO, network of exile media outlets, founders talked about their experiences, problems, solutions, and the significance of exiled media in the new landscape of authoritarian regimes and what inspired them to found a network.
Thank you, Maria, in Perugia at the International Journalism Festival.
Today, we've been discovering the champions, as we call them, the guardians of freedom of expression. Thanks for being with us at this special edition of Mag News in honor of the World Press Freedom Day.